Hello, dear viewers. Today we are going to meet the most dangerous criminal in Argentine and world criminal history. He was caught when he had just turned 20 years old and managed to become the longest imprisoned person in the history of Argentina. With his expensive clothing and baby face, he developed a fan base. He was even the subject of movies and books about his life. If we are ready, we can start with the story of Carlos Eduardo Robledo Puch, better known in the media as the Angel of Death. Carlos Eduardo Robledo Puch was born on January 12, 1952, in the town of Florida, Argentina. Florida was one of the most affluent areas of the province of Buenos Aires, and Carlos grew up in a high socioeconomic family. His father, Victor Elias Robledo Puch, worked as a traveling inspector for General Motors and was often away from home. His mother, Aida Avitan, was born in Germany and immigrated to Argentina during the Second World War. Carlos's childhood was spent living the kind of life a normal child would live. When they moved to Olivos, he used to play cowboys with the other children, wearing a handkerchief over his face and pretending to be a bandit. His parents sent him to private schools and baptized him Catholic. His mother made him study piano, but Carlos's real talent lay in taking what others had. Carlos committed his first theft at the age of 11 when he stole some candies from the school canteen. He was successful because the attendant didn't notice, and then he started stealing school supplies. At school, he got bad grades and did not communicate well with his friends, but he had no learning difficulties. He liked reading books and math, but spent most of his time watching television. When he reached adolescence, he enrolled in the San Fernando Industrial School, but he failed and failed out. What he learned contained tools that would be useful to him later on. Next, he transferred to the Don Orione School. But here, too, his academic performance was poor and his behavior increasingly problematic. During this period, he stole 1,500 pesos from the school secretariat, but was soon caught and expelled. By the age of 15, Carlos had become a rebellious teenager and was very difficult for his family to control. But despite this, he was loving towards his family and said he wanted to stand on his own 2 feet. But he was never able to fulfill this desire. His parents told him that if he didn't want to succeed in school, he should at least learn a trade. So he started a course in electrical appliance repair. But unfortunately, that didn't change anything either. Thanks to his extreme passion for breaking the law, the constant absence of his father, and the weak character of his mother, Carlos was able to do whatever he wanted. He would go out at night and have fun breaking street lamps and burning mailboxes. But what excited him most was stealing someone else's property. One day, he went to Sebastian San's band, the owner of the pharmacy where he worked, with a transistor radio he had stolen. San's band was suspicious of the origin of the device, but Carlos' mother agreed to the sale of the radio, saying that her son wanted to buy a bicycle. But it wasn't just a bicycle that Carlos wanted. In his eyes, there was more. On the morning of December 15th, 1968, he stole a Siam Breda motorcycle from the workshop of Marcelo Stechin, a former motorcycle champion. He used the motorcycle for show for a few days, but was discovered by Stechin's son and handed over to the police station. When confronted by the police, Carlos confessed to 14 thefts. He was then sent to the Manuel Estrada Art and Vocational School, better known as the Bonanza Correctional Center. This was Carlos' first experience of being deprived of his freedom. In February 1969, he arrived at the Bonanza House of Correction. The director of the institution told him that they would teach him a trade, and that he would not be punished, but emphasized the importance of following the rules. Carlos said that he did not communicate with his family, and that they did not understand him at all, and that he had no emotional connection with his father. During his stay in the correctional center, Carlos often preferred to be alone. He spent time playing basketball or reading books in the library. Other children teased him about his boyish appearance, but none of the problems became serious. A psychological evaluation revealed that his criminal behavior was due to a lack of love at home. 20 days later, with his mother's permission, he left the institution and promised his mother that he would never behave in the same way again. In 1970, his parents enrolled Carlos in the famous Cervantes College in Vicente Lopez as a last chance to set him on the right path. Carlos, 18 years old, now had to fulfill his responsibilities, but things did not turn out as his parents had hoped. At school, he met 16-year-old Jorge Ibanez. Jorge was a rebellious youth who used to steal alms boxes from churches at night. Carlos and Jorge formed a strong friendship. Together, they were expelled from school. Ibanez inspired Carlos to greater crimes. Soon, he met Ibanez's father. He was the leader of a robbery gang. Carlos was welcomed as a member of this family, and the gang leader taught him how to use a shotgun. Night raids targeted jewelry stores and businesses. Carlos still looked like a kind and gentle boy, with elegant features and expensive clothes. While other criminals looked down on him, girls were attracted to him. After a while, he met a girl named Monica, and they became lovers. Ibanez, however, warned Carlos to stay away from women. He considered them a nuisance. After a jewelry store raid, Carlos and Ibanez split the loot and set off for Mar del Plata on the motorcycles Chacin had stolen. However, on the way, they were stopped by the police and taken to the police station. Carlos was released with forged documents, but on condition that he brought the documents for the motorcycles. He did not return immediately, but went to Mar del Plata, where he sold the stolen jewelry. Sometime later, he met a new accomplice, a baker named Hector Somoza. At the time, however, it was not possible to recruit Somoza into the gang. Carlos reunited with Ibanez after a period of separation. Although Jorge's father did not trust Carlos, the two began working together again. They started with small robberies, until the event that would change everything. On March 15, 1971, Carlos and Jorge targeted a disco called En Amor in La Luz in a nearby venue. This was not just a robbery. A few days earlier, Jorge had gotten into a fight with a bartender there. When they broke in, they ransacked the place and took money and records, as well as a pistol. That's when they realized that two men were sleeping inside. Carlos sneaked up and shot them both in the head, killing them. The victims were Pedro Mastronardi, the owner of the place, and Manuel Godoy, the bartender with whom they had been fighting. These were the first murders Carlos committed. On May 3rd, they broke into a spare parts store in Vicente Lopez. Inside, they found the watchman, Jose Bianchi, his wife Dora, and their 10-month-old baby. Carlos killed the guard instantly. He also shot Dora, who woke up to the sound of gunfire, but failed to kill her. Jorge sexually assaulted her and they left, thinking she was dead. Dora survived, but they were not caught because she described what happened as a crime of passion. On May 24th, they entered a supermarket in Olivos. When the security guard inside, Juan Scatone, woke up, Carlos killed him too. They stole 5 million pesos and crowned it with a night of celebration. In the process, the relationship between Carlos and Jorge began to deteriorate. Jorge wanted to be more visible, to be recognized. For Carlos, this was dangerous. Carlos was also disturbed by the fact that Jorge was making decisions on his own. and that he was constantly abusing women. Jorge now spent most of his time with his waitress girlfriend. On August 5th, the two were driving in the Núñez neighborhood, Carlos behind the wheel. They collided with a taxi. Jorge died on the spot. Carlos managed to escape, but he took his identity papers with him. It was ruled a traffic accident. However, some sources have suggested that Carlos may have killed Jorge before the accident. Carlos was silent for a while after his loss, but this did not mean that he had given up the crime. He soon remembered Héctor Somoza, the baker he had met earlier in Mar del Plata. Their connection had been superficial then, but now Carlos needed a new partner. Somoza was still a baker, and he thought Carlos was only interested in car repairs. But this time things were different. Carlos explained the shady business he was running and made him an offer. It was easier than he expected. Somoza accepted the offer without hesitation. On the night of November 15th, they carried out their first robbery. They broke into a small supermarket in Bologna. Despite a long search, they didn't find a dime. But Carlos was not idle. He found the sleeping security guard, Raúl del Peña, and ended his life with a single bullet. Then he handed Somoza an old cell phone they had found inside and said, "Give this to your mother as a gift." Their next target was a car dealership in Vicente Lopez. This time they got lucky. They found 90,000 pesos. But Carlos spotted Juan Carlos Rosas, a security guard standing at the corner of the building. He shot him in the back before he even turned around. On November 25th, they broke into another car dealership. This time, they were confronted by Bienvenido Serapio Farin. Farin was unarmed. He raised his hands and begged. He wanted to live. But Carlos had no mercy. He killed him too, with 3 bullets. This raid earned them 1.5 million pesos. After this lucrative attack, the two took a 2-month break. Carlos turned 20 years old. After a short silence, on February 3rd, at Somoza's suggestion, they targeted the hardware store Serio Hermanos in Corupa. They infiltrated in the silence of the night. They locked the security guard, Manuel Acevedo, in a room. But Carlos returned a few minutes later. He opened the door and fired 2 bullets without hesitation. The man collapsed. The robbery continued. When they reached the safe room, they managed to open it with a torch. 1,400,000 pesos came out, but that night would end differently. Carlos suddenly felt movement behind him. It seemed to him that Somoza was playing a game, sneaking up on him. Maybe a joke, maybe a betrayal. Whatever it was, Carlos' reaction was sudden and deadly. He knocked him down with a hard kick, drew his gun, and shot him in the back. Somoza was begging on the ground, but Carlos showed no mercy. He put another bullet in his face. With terrible cold-bloodedness, he burned Somoza's hands and face with a torch to hide his identity. This had become an ordinary part of leaving no trace. But this time, a small detail escaped him. In Somoza's pocket, burnt but still legible, was an identity card. And this was the evidence that would seal the fate of Carlos Robledo Puch. Somoza's death spelled the end for Robledo Puch. The police first went to Somoza's house. His mother said that her son had last been out with Carlos. The police then went to Robledo Puch's house as a suspect. But Carlos was not there. The next day, on February 4th, Carlos was drinking beer in a bar. He was then stopped by police on his way home on his motorcycle. He was questioned, handcuffed, and taken to the Tigre police station. The police did not have enough evidence, but they suspected him. So they interrogated him in a room. After pressure and torture, Carlos confessed to all his crimes one by one. 4 days later, the news leaked to the press. Despite his young age, clean face, and calm demeanor, his brutal murders horrified the public. The media began to refer to him as Shakal, Black Angel, and Angel of Death. During interrogations, when asked why he often killed his victims in their sleep, he sarcastically replied, "It was impossible to wake them up." He even argued that he was doing them a favor. He was then transferred to a high-security prison in La Plata, Unit 9. Here he tried to escape several times. The most serious attempt was in 1973. He was transferred to the hospital under the pretext of asthma and escaped with a hook and a sheet. He was caught a few days later, exhausted and desperate. His trial began on August 4th, 1980, and lasted 4 months. 92 witnesses testified. Psychiatrists reported that he was a serious psychopath and would kill again if released. He was tried on a total of 36 charges, 11 of which were murder. On November 27, 1980, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. When he heard the verdict, he said only this sentence: "One day I will get out, and I will finish you all off." Throughout his imprisonment, he was never out of the spotlight. He received fan mail and answered some of them. In 1982, he wrote to the President of the Republic to participate in the Malvinas War. In 1996, he witnessed a major riot in Sierra Chica prison. His mother died in 1993 and his father in 2005. Over the years, his story has been the subject of dozens of studies, documentaries, and books. One of the best known is the biography El Ángel Negro by journalist Rodolfo Palacios. This book inspired the 2018 movie El Ángel. The film featured a more romanticized, emotional version of Robledo Puch. The real Carlos listed Matt Damon and DiCaprio among the actors he suggested for the movie. In 2019, he was hospitalized with pneumonia and moved to a unit for elderly inmates. He always maintained that he was innocent, that Ibanez was the real criminal. He repeatedly asked for release, but his requests were denied. In an interview in 2020, he said, "I'm old, I'm tired, I don't want to suffer anymore. I want to die with dignity." Carlos Robledo Puch remains Argentina's longest-serving convicted criminal. The dark story of Carlos Robledo Puch ends here. Thank you for joining us on this spooky journey. If you are interested in this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. See you in the next Dark Dossier. Beware the night.